section 7.7 and 7.8 where I'm combining these two sections, and what we're doing is called factor by grouping. And just to kind of do a quick review, recall that a standard form is always written from highest degree to lowest degree, and we're going to be working with this particular standard form, ax squared plus bx plus c. This particular standard form is what we deal with when we're working with what's called quadratics. All right, which we're going to be doing a lot more in the very near future. But this is the basic standard form equation of a quadratic, and that's what we're working with today. And what we're going to be doing is, last time I gave you this list where in order to solve a polynomial, we had to follow these basic steps. Set the equation to 0, factor out the GCF and keep it, check for special products, factor by grouping, which is what we're going to be going in more detail today, and lastly, set each factor equal to 0 and solve. All right, so this is what we're going to be talking about today in more detail, is factor by grouping. And how do we do that? By this entirely large list that you see in front of you. All right, so I'm going to read through it, and then it's going to be easier to see as I work it. I'm just going to have this through. So my first step, multiply A times C. What am I talking about? Well, if I have an equation, it's the coefficients that are in there. So the coefficient in front of the x squared is A, the coefficient in front of the x is B, and the constant at the very end, basically it doesn't have an x, happens to be C. So I'm going to multiply A times C. I'm then going to find all factors of A and C. Then I'm going to choose the factor of AC that adds to B. I know, we'll get there. We're then going to take and replace B of x, or B times x, with the factors found in step C. Next, we're going to factor out the GCF from the first two terms, factor out the GCFs from the second two terms. Then we're going to combine the two GCFs into a binomial, and then the binomial that is left is written only once. This makes a binomial times a binomial. Now, all of these words mean absolutely no sense until I actually start showing you what we're going to really do. So I'm going to pull this to the side. Make sure that you have it with you. We're going to be referencing it a lot, so just keep it with you. And let's go with this thing. So let's factor. All right, so according to my steps of factoring, these are my basic steps. I always need to set the equation to 0, and right now we're not doing an equation, we're doing factoring, so we can kind of skip that step, and then we can look at 2. It says factor out the GCF. Well, is there a GCF for all 3 of these terms? No. Nothing can go into all 3 of these terms at the same time, so we can move on to the next step, which is what we would call checking for special products, but I can go ahead and tell you we don't have that. All right, now gets into the factor by grouping. That first step says to multiply A times C. Well, 2 times -6 gives me a -12. All right. Now, the next step tells me to find all the factors of AC. So we got to find all the possible factors of -12. Well, I can do -1 and 12. I can do -2 and 6, -3 and 4. All of these multiply together to get -12. But not only can I do these, but I can also do their opposites. So 1 and -12, 2 and -6, and 3 and -4. I can do the opposites. All right, so guys, I must apologize on this. This is an error of my ways. I had to pause the video, but I do need to change this number. This was an error on me, so we're going to change that really, really quick from 3x. And what we're going to do is change that number to a 4x. So I'm going to write 4 in the best of my ability, so that would be 4x. And again, I am sorry about that. It kind of messes up the vibe of the video. So originally, going back to what we were talking about, this would be 2x squared plus 4x minus 6. Our first step was to multiply A and C to get -12. Then we were to find all the possible factors, all right, which we did. So -1 to 12, 2 and 6, negative 3 and 4, and then its opposites. This goes to step C. Choose the factor of AC that adds to B. All right, so if I were to look at all of these numbers, I need to find out what adds up to a positive 4. Well, negative 1 and 12 will not do that, but if I have a negative 2 and 6, it will add up to a positive 4. So this is the factor that I'm going to choose, which gives me to step D. It says replace BX with the factors found in step C. So this is what we're going to do. I'm going to keep my first term like I normally would, but I'm going to replace this 4x with two things. I'm going to replace it with a minus 2x and a plus 6x. Notice that I've just basically put those two terms in the place of that 4x. And then I put my minus 6 there. All right, this changes the look of the equation, but it doesn't change the equation because when we combine these two terms, we do get 4x. The next one is step E. It says factor out the GCFs from the first two terms. So if I were to look at these first two terms here, my GCF would happen to be 2x. I can pull a 2x out of both of these terms. What does that leave me? Well, I'm going to put a parenthesis here, and I'm going to put that leaves me with the x minus 1. Now let's look at the second two terms. What can I factor out? And this goes to step F. What can I factor out of these two terms? I can factor out a positive 6. All right, notice that I put a plus 6 there. I didn't just put a 6, I put a positive 6 because there's a positive here. When I do, what that leaves me is x minus 1. Okay? The last step says combine the two GCFs into a binomial. So I'm going to take this GCF and this GCF and I'm going to combine them into a binomial just like that. And then it says that the binomial that is left is written only once. Notice how that these two are the exact same thing. So we only have to write it one time. And what I have just done is factored. This is my factored form of 2x squared plus 4x minus 6. All right? Now, let's try the next one. Same concept. I'm going to follow my steps. Multiply A and C to get negative 6. I'm going to list all possible factors. I can have 1 and negative 6. 2 and negative 3, and I could have its opposites, which would be negative 1 and 6, and then negative 2 and 3. I ask myself which one of these factors, according to step C, adds to make this middle term. Well, the only possible answer is this right here. That brings me to step D, where I'm going to rewrite this as 3x squared minus 2x plus 3x minus 2. I'm taking these factors and replacing my B term. Now that I've done that, I'm going to ask myself, and the next step for E is there a GCF I can factor out of my first two terms? In this case, the only thing I have is x. So I'm going to write that down. What does that leave me? It leaves me with 3x minus 2. Now I need to ask myself, in step F, is there a term that I can factor out of this? Well, you're probably thinking, no, there isn't. But actually, there is. When there is a term that works like this, you can actually factor out the number 1. I can factor out 1. And what that gives me is 3x minus 2. Okay? Now it goes to my last step. I'm going to combine the two GCFs, x plus 1, into a single binomial, and then I'm going to write these two down. And I have completed my factoring. If I were to use the FOIL method on both of these things right now, I would definitely get that they would match to the first one. All right, now, let's do number 4 together, and I'm going to leave 3 and 5 alone. So number 4, if we were to look at this, we always have to ask ourselves or go down our list of steps. The first step is to check to see if there's a GCF out of all of these, okay? Remember, like when I said about solving polynomials, we are setting the equation to 0, which is not necessary right now. And the next piece is factor out a GCF and keep it. So if I were to look at this, I can actually factor out a GCF of 8 out of all of this right now. And when I do, that leaves me with v squared plus v minus 6. Okay? Now I have to ask myself special products, which there isn't one, and then I need to see if I can factor this term through grouping, which I can. So really, let's go ahead and look at step A. It says multiply A times C. There's nothing in front of it but like an invisible 1. So 1 times negative 6 gives me a negative 6. All possible factors I've already written up here. I don't feel like writing again. I've got them right here up in front of me. I need to find out which one of these adds up to a positive v. Well, in this particular case, it looks like I'm going to use the same factors again. So I can rewrite this. Notice what I'm going to do. I'm going to write this and keep my 8. I can't get rid of that GCF, and I'm going to go v squared. Then it would be minus 2v plus 3v minus 6, okay? Now I continue to follow my pattern. I'm going to see, is there something I can factor out of my first two terms? Yes, there is. I can factor out a v. What does that leave me? It leaves me with a v minus 2. What can I factor out of my second two terms? I can factor out a plus 3, which leaves me a v minus 2. And all of that's still in parentheses, okay? And my 8 never went away. So let's bring that 8 back down. And let's continue along with it. I'm going to combine these two GCFs to get v plus 3. I'm going to write these two down because they're the same thing. And I have factored this thing out completely. So this is factored out to 8 times v plus 3 times v minus 2. So if I FOIL method this and then took that, I would have gotten this one and then multiplied it by 8 to get my original problem. So why don't you try numbers 3 and 5 on your own? So for number 3, you should have got x plus 1 times x plus 2. And for number 5, you may have got this one a little bit confused because there's something special, kind of an interesting case in this one. When you found your factors, you should have gotten that you would have had negative 3y and a minus y. And then when you went to go factor out your GCFs out of your terms, your first two terms you could have factored out a y, which would have given you y minus 3. And then in this last two terms, notice that it's a negative y plus 3. What you may have factored out a 1, but what you should have probably did was factor out the negative 1. And when you do, that would become a y, because negative 1y, factor out a negative 1, leaves you with y. And then 3, factor out a negative 1, leaves you a negative 3, which will allow these two terms to be the same. And then these two terms, they can be put together in parentheses. Now, for both of these things, it's very possible that you got the same answer as I did, but you may have put your terms in different positions. And if that's the case, it's absolutely fine. You did nothing wrong. All right, so that's the concept what's happening here. We're going to do, let's do these two together and then we'll be done with this video because it is running a little bit longer than I expected, but that's okay. So we're going to be doing the whole thing. First off, we need to solve this. So it's telling me to set the equation equal to 0. That is my first step with solving a polynomial. In this particular case, I have. Step 2, factor out the GCF and keep it. So if I were to look out at all three of these terms, I can go ahead and tell you right now that my term that I can factor out is a 7. And that would leave me with d squared minus 9d plus 20 is equal to 0. All right, that was pretty straightforward. Now let's see. My next step is to multiply my a and my c. So this is technically a 1. So my factors that I'm working, my ac would be 20. So I need to find all possible factors. I can do 120, 2 and 10, 4 and 5. Then I can do anything else. No, that's basically it. then I could do its opposites. -1, -20, -2, -10, -4, and -5. Which one of these factors adds up to a -9? Well, it's this one. -4 and -5 when multiplied gives me 20, but when added gives me 9. Knowing that, I can go ahead and finish this out, bring down my first term, my 7, my factor, and I could say d squared minus 4d minus 5d plus 20 is equal to 0. Now, I'm going to bring down my 7 again, put my parentheses here because I'm going to need it, put another one here. And I know that out of these first two terms, I can factor out a d, which leaves me with a d minus 4 on the inside, okay? Out of these next two terms, I can actually factor out a -5 out of both the -5d and the 20. So I'm going to do that. And when I do, that leaves me with d minus 4, okay, is equal to 0. Let's go ahead and finish this out. It will be 7 times d minus 4, because that's the same thing, times d minus 5 is equal to 0. Now, I've done my factor by grouping. These are my factors, and I can prove it. If I were to multiply all this back out, it would give me my original problem. However, I go to step 5. It says set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So I'm going to say 7 is equal to 0, d minus 4 is equal to 0, and d minus 5 is equal to 0. Now that I've done that, I know that this is a lie, this is not true, so I can cross it out. I can solve this and I get that d is equal to 4, and I can solve this and I get d is equal to 5. So the two possible solutions that I have, which makes sense because this has a degree of 2, meaning I have two answers. My two answers are d equals equal to 4 and d is equal to 5. All right, I'm going to try number 2 with you, and because there's another little thing that's happening in this one to kind of show you a trick that you might need. So my first step in solving this is to set it equal to 0. So I'm going to write 8m squared plus 30m minus 7 equals 0. So I have done that. All right, now it tells me in step 2, factor out the GCF and keep it. Well, here's the problem. There's no GCF for any of those things. I can't factor out anything. Step 3 talks about checking for special products. We can't do that. And now we have to do our factor by grouping. So let's follow the procedures on this. We're going to do A times C. Well, let's use our calculator because I just want to. A times negatives, and it gives me a -56. Now, already you might be like, oh, I have to find the factors of all of these things. And yes, you do. But we have what's called a graphing calculator. This is now going to be very useful when you're finding factors. So this is what we're going to do. I'm going to go to y equals, and I'm going to put -56, and I'm going to divide that by x. What this is going to do is give me a list of all possible factors of -56. And how I do that is go second table. And here we go. It gives me a list of possible things. So I have 1 in -56, 2 in -28, 4 in -14, and let's see, I can continue to go, 7 in -8, and so forth and so on. My job right now is to find out what would equal to a +30. So, hey guys, sorry about that. I just happened to notice this was another little typo again, on the previous one. This should be a -7, and so when I set this equal to 0, that would be a +7, and that would change this into a 56, okay? So a +56. With that being said, I can go back to what I was trying to show you, 56 divided by x, and I can look at my table, and then I can try to find anything that will give me a +30. So if I look at it, I have factors of 1 and 56. Does that add up to 30? No. Let's look at the next one. 2 and 28. Does that add up to 30? Yes, it does, and we'll use that in just a second. But as you can see, if that didn't work, I could keep going down and looking for my factors. 4 and 14 wouldn't have worked, and then I can do 7 and 8, 8 and 7. And on top of that, it would also show me the negative factors that would also work. But we already know that it's going to be 2 and 28. So with that being said, I can factor this, break the b term up and say 8m squared plus 2m plus 28m plus 7 is equal to 0. Now that I've done that, it's just a matter of following all the other steps. Look at my first two terms, and I can factor out a GCF of 2m out of both of those. That would leave me with 4m plus 1. And then I can look at my second two terms, and I can factor out a 7, a positive 7 out of both of those. And that would also leave me with a 4m plus 1 is equal to 0. I'm going to write down the thing that is the same, which is 4m plus 1. The two GCFs, I'm going to combine those together, and I'm going to set that equal to 0. Now that I've done that, I can move on into step 5, and I can say 4m plus 1 is equal to 0, and 2m plus 7 is equal to 0. This would give me m is equal to a negative 1/4, and this would give me m is equal to a negative 3.5 when I solve this out. And that's how I do this particular type of problem. Again, this is a lot of information in this one video, which is kind of the way I kind of intended it. And the more you do this, the better you will get. There's no way around it. So definitely understand that you're probably not going to get this the first time around, but the more you practice this, the better you get. And that's it for this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.